In the heart of medieval Europe, when fear was both a tool and a weapon, strange contraptions emerged from the shadows of dungeons. Among them was the Judas Cradle, a device designed not just to punish, but to break the human soul. It was not born in haste. It was crafted deliberately with cold ingenuity. The cradle was simple in appearance, yet monstrous in purpose. A tall wooden frame stood over a sharp pyramid of iron, polished to a cruel point. Victims were bound and slowly lowered onto its apex, their weight becoming the very engine of their torment. The sharp geometry promised no quick relief, only endless suffering. Unlike the wheel, the rack, or the gallows, the Judas Cradle was an instrument of patience. It was not meant to end a life immediately, but to stretch pain across hours, even days. The victim's body betrayed them, for every breath, every muscle spasm pulled them deeper into the pyramid's piercing embrace. The device earned its name from betrayal itself. Just as Judas had condemned Christ with a kiss, the cradle condemned its captives with the illusion of a seat. It looked deceptively like a chair, but once touched, it became a throne of agony, mocking both comfort and dignity. The cradle first appeared in whispers across Italy and Spain, carried by inquisitors and executioners. They called it a divine tool, one that would extract confessions and expose heresy. To the authorities, it was not cruelty. It was justice shaped in iron. To the condemned, it was hell. The condemned were stripped of everything before their ordeal. Clothing was removed to expose the body to the cold air, leaving no barrier between flesh and steel. Ropes bound their wrists and ankles, and weights were sometimes added to hasten their descent. In silence, they hovered above the pyramid, dread gnawing at them long before pain began. The slow lowering was its most dreadful feature. The executioner turned a crank or loosened ropes by hand, inch by inch, letting the victim feel the sharpened point press against the most tender parts of the body. It was a torment of anticipation as much as penetration, a psychological blade sharper than steel. The first cries often came not from pain but from realization. The victim's body trembled as the pyramid's tip threatened to break the skin. They pleaded, cursed, prayed. Yet once the executioner let go, gravity itself became the true torturer, dragging them downward without mercy. The Judas Cradle found its place in public squares as well as hidden chambers. At times, it was a spectacle, drawing crowds hungry for punishment disguised as entertainment. Children clung to their mothers, while merchants leaned on their stools, all watching a soul squirm in the grip of engineered despair. But not all punishments ended swiftly. Some victims remained suspended for hours, their screams rising and falling like waves. The body could endure much, but eventually muscles gave way, forcing deeper descent. Each shift, each shudder, tore flesh further, a slow carving by geometry alone. The church, cloaked in sanctity, often endorsed such tortures. To them, confession was salvation, and pain was the price of truth. The cradle was said to purify through suffering, squeezing lies out drop by drop. Heretics, blasphemers, and rebels were all measured against its steel edge. Yet not everyone accepted its presence. Chroniclers wrote with unease, describing it as a device unworthy of humanity. Some whispered that even executioners flinched at their work, for the cradle left no clean wounds, only humiliation and slow disintegration. To sit upon it was to be reduced, body and spirit alike. The humiliation was deliberate. Victims often defecated or bled as the pyramid tore into them, a spectacle of shame before their peers. Guards mocked them, onlookers jeered, and judges declared it proof of guilt. The cradle was not just pain, it was degradation etched into memory. Legends grew around those who endured it. Some were said to survive for days, drinking only water forced upon them between sessions. Their minds broke long before their bodies did, voices fading into hollow murmurs. By the time death came, it was a mercy, though rarely granted swiftly. One account speaks of a young heretic in Barcelona, accused of denying the Trinity. He was bound, gagged, and lowered slowly onto the cradle before a jeering crowd. His body quivered as iron split flesh, yet his silence enraged the inquisitors. By nightfall, madness consumed him, and by dawn his life had slipped away. Another tale recounts a thief in Florence, punished not for heresy, but for daring to rob a nobleman's home. The cradle did not discriminate between sins. For hours he endured, screaming confessions of crimes both real and imagined, naming names simply to be freed from the pyramid's kiss. None believed him, yet all wrote his words. The Judas Cradle thus became a scribe of lies and truth alike. It forced the tongue to wag, but never guaranteed honesty. Confessions bled from it as much as bodies did, muddied by desperation. To the authorities, it mattered little. Words spoken on the cradle carried weight, no matter their origin. Its design spread like wildfire, carried by craftsmen who whispered of profit cloaked in secrecy. Each city adapted it to their liking, some taller, some wider, some with sharper points, polished to a mirror finish. Every executioner became an artist, refining agony into a perverse craft. Yet the shadow of fear grew longer. Even those who enforced the law felt uneasy knowing the cradle's existence. Nobles whispered that rebellion was better than capture, for the cradle awaited any who crossed authority. It was no longer a tool of justice alone, it was a weapon of control. As the 15th century darkened, the Judas Cradle became a symbol. It was not merely an object, but a warning, a throne of torment, standing silently in corners of castles and chambers of courts. The very sight of it broke men before they were ever bound. Thus the cradle's legacy began, not of justice, not of truth, but of terror, carefully crafted into steel and wood. Its pyramid rose from the ground like a monument to human cruelty, sharp and waiting. And those who sat upon it, unwilling and broken, became its silent witnesses. The Judas Cradle was never just about pain. It was about control. Those who ruled in the Middle Ages understood that fear could govern where swords could not. The cradle became a language of terror, one that whispered obedience before words were even spoken. Inquisition courts grew fond of its cruelty. Accusations of witchcraft, heresy, and forbidden books filled their halls, and the cradle waited as their answer. For many, the device was the final stage of interrogation, the silent judge that spoke only through screams. Confession was always the goal. It mattered little if it was true or false, so long as it was uttered. As the victim's body trembled upon the pyramid, words poured forth. Names of neighbors, family members, anyone who might ease the suffering. Each syllable dripped with blood and desperation. The inquisitors called this truth, but the cradle knew better. It tore honesty and lies together, mixing them until neither could be separated. Innocents and guilty alike sat upon its point, and all cried out the same, proving only that flesh yields when pressed by steel. Executioners became masters of rhythm. They knew how fast to lower a body, when to pause, when to let gravity take its course. A skilled hand could keep a victim alive for hours, even days, prolonging the torment without breaking the vessel too soon. Their craft was cruelty perfected. At times, victims were fed water and bread between sessions, just enough to keep life lingering. Their wounds grew infected, their minds clouded with delirium, yet they were dragged back to the pyramid, their bodies forced to relearn pain. The cradle demanded more than a confession, it demanded surrender. Humiliation was as important as agony. The condemned often lost all dignity upon the pyramid. The body betrayed them, bleeding, trembling, and releasing itself under pressure. Onlookers laughed as once proud men and women were reduced to shivering husks. Shame became the second edge of the cradle. One account tells of a noblewoman in Aragon accused of consorting with demons. Her family begged for clemency, but the court decreed the cradle. Draped in fine silks, she was lowered onto the pyramid, her cries muffled by her pride. By the second day, her voice was gone, her silence mistaken for guilt. In Germany, a miller was accused of hiding stolen grain. He swore innocence until the cradle received him. By torchlight, he named thieves that did not exist, places that could not be found. His lies filled scrolls, and though he died upon the pyramid, his words condemned 3 more to its edge. The cradle became more than punishment. It became a tool of politics. Rivals could be silenced by accusation alone, their names tied to the pyramid through forced confessions. Land changed hands, wealth shifted, alliances shattered, all because steel pressed into flesh until tongues surrendered. The device's silence was deceptive. Unlike the rack or the wheel, The cradle did not produce broken bones or twisted limbs. It left fewer outward marks, as if cruelty itself wanted to be hidden. Yet the insides of victims told another story: ruptured tissue, internal bleeding, infection that gnawed at life. Those who survived bore scars deeper than skin. Many walked again, but none were whole. Their bodies remembered the point that had pierced them, and their minds replayed the descent long after ropes were cut. The Judas Cradle sat not only in dungeons, but in memories that never faded. Executioners themselves were not immune to its shadow. Some drank heavily after sessions, drowning the cries that haunted their ears. Others grew cold and mechanical, their hearts hardened by routine. To them, the pyramid was no longer an instrument of justice, but a job, a grim trade passed from father to son. Whispers spread that the cradle cursed its users. Illness followed some who built or handled it, and a few were said to die in agony, their own bodies wasting away as if the pyramid's bite had turned upon them. Superstition wrapped itself around the device, giving it a dark aura beyond steel. Yet rulers cared little for whispers. They saw only the cradle's efficiency, its power to silence dissent and bind loyalty with fear. In courts, it stood beside the throne as a reminder. In prisons, it loomed like a waiting shadow. To defy authority was to risk its embrace. The cradle's presence shaped entire communities. Rumors of its use traveled faster than its sight, and fear did the rest. Villagers whispered warnings to their children: obey the priest, honor the Lord, and never speak against the church. The pyramid did not need to be seen, it lived in imagination. And so the Judas Cradle became both visible and invisible. Visible in dungeons where torches gleamed against its iron point. Invisible in daily life, where fear kept mouths shut and backs bowed. It was the phantom ruler of towns, silent but absolute. Every device carried its own story, every pyramid sharpened by the cries of those who met it. Some cradles rotted in forgotten chambers, their wood eaten by worms, their iron rusted with old blood. Yet even ruined, they whispered of what had once been, their silence heavier than screams. The Judas Cradle did not need armies or banners. It ruled through memory, through the whispered tales of neighbors who swore they had heard a scream echo from the castle at night. It ruled through silence at dinner tables, where no one dared ask why someone had vanished. By the 16th century, the cradle's fame had spread across Europe, woven into the fabric of fear. To some, it was rumor, to others, nightmare. But to the condemned, it was reality, sharper than any blade. And in the halls of power, its shadow lingered, a reminder that obedience could be forced 1 inch at a time. Thus, the Judas Cradle did more than break bodies. It carved into history itself, leaving a scar invisible but eternal. It was not just a pyramid of steel, it was a throne of terror. And Europe sat upon it unknowingly, balanced between obedience and silence. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the Judas Cradle was already becoming less a tool of justice and more a ghost. The world was changing, science was rising, cities were growing, and whispers of human dignity began to stir. Yet the cradle remained, clinging to dark corners like a spider that refused to leave. Its use declined, but not its memory. Torture itself faced criticism from scholars and reformers who argued that pain could not produce truth. The cradle, with its silent pyramid and degrading torment, became a symbol of the very cruelty reformers wanted to erase. Still, some clung to it, unwilling to let go of fear's sharp edge. Executioners rarely destroyed their cradles. Instead, they locked them away, hidden in vaults or buried in castle dungeons. Some rotted with time, wood collapsing into dust, iron rusting into fragile orange flakes. But others remained intact, preserved like relics of terror, waiting in silence as centuries turned. As the Enlightenment dawned, Europe began to look back at its instruments of torture with both horror and fascination. Chroniclers catalogued the rack, the wheel, the Iron Maiden, and among them, the Judas Cradle. Its name alone carried a venomous poetry, tying betrayal and agony into a single image. Stories flourished, each darker than the last. Some told of victims lasting 7 days upon the cradle, wasting away inch by inch. Others swore the device was laced with oils or spikes to hasten infection. These tales grew with retelling, feeding the cradle's legend even when it was no longer in use. Travelers wrote of dungeons where they had seen it, a monstrous chair with a point sharp as a spear. Some were exaggerations, some perhaps true, but all painted the cradle as the very embodiment of medieval cruelty. It became less a device and more a symbol, an icon of a brutal age. In Italy, guides whispered to visitors about a cradle still hidden in an old fortress. In Spain, rumors claimed the Inquisition kept one polished and ready, even into the 18th century. No one knew how much was truth and how much myth, but the cradle's shadow stretched far beyond its walls. Over time, the Judas Cradle left history and entered imagination. Artists painted it in grim detail, their canvases filled with screaming figures suspended above the pyramid. Writers described it with morbid fascination, their words dripping with horror. It became entertainment as much as history, a story told to chill the blood. Yet behind the myths lay the undeniable truth. The cradle was real, and it had been used. Too many accounts, too many documents, too many hushed confessions from executioners confirmed its existence. It was not fantasy. It was cruelty made into iron. Museums later claimed to display surviving cradles. Some were authentic, others likely replicas forged for spectacle. Tourists stared at them through glass, horrified yet captivated. Children pressed their faces to the case, unable to imagine a world where such a device had ever been necessary. But history does not ask for belief, it only waits to be remembered. The Judas Cradle's greatest power was never its pyramid, but its silence. Unlike swords or gallows, it left no heroic death, no martyr's image. It left humiliation and whispers, stains on memory too shameful to speak. That silence lingered, carrying its cruelty further than any execution could. In modern times, historians debate its use. Some argue it was rare, more rumor than reality, inflated by fear. Others insist it was widespread, hidden by courts that valued secrecy. Whatever the truth, its legend remains unshaken, carved into the cultural image of medieval darkness. Today, the Judas Cradle stands as a mirror. It reflects humanity's ability to invent suffering, to refine cruelty into tools of precision. It also reflects our fascination with horror, our need to peer into the shadows even as we claim to hate them. It is both history and warning. For those who once sat upon it, no words remain. Their cries faded centuries ago, their bodies returned to dust. But the pyramid endures in imagination, sharp and waiting, as if reminding us that cruelty is never far from invention. Every age has its cradles, some made of iron, others of silence. Thus, the Judas Cradle lives on, not in the dungeons of castles, but in the corridors of memory. It is spoken of in hushed tones, written of with shivers, and remembered with unease. A pyramid of steel, once lowered into flesh, now raised as a monument of warning. And so its legacy endures, not a seat of power, not a throne of kings, but a seat of agony. A device that outlived its makers through memory alone, forever sharper in legend than even its cruelest point of iron.